So I'm going to go over the 3 peak power sensor bugs here and show that they've been fixed in the latest firmware. Let's start with the first one, and I'll do a frequency of 2 gigahertz. Let's do an amplitude of like 6 dBm. I have a power splitter and a whole bunch of cables going on between my source and my power sensor. Pulse, turn it on, 4 microsecond, 2 microsecond. I have a peak power sensor hooked up to the USB port. Here's my signal. Let's change the time length to 8 microseconds. And let's do analysis on. And the issue is that if you turn the source off, and we'll do RF off now for a while, and we would wait about a minute, and we'll wait like 30 seconds or something till the signal goes away. And then the customer would turn it back on. It would say trigger loss, and it couldn't recover till you disconnected and reconnected it. And now that problem has been resolved. If you turn RF back on, it picks up the signal. I'm still just waiting a little bit longer to show you kind of what happens if you wait. It says waiting for a trigger, and then it starts kind of making a measurement of the noise level because there's nothing connected. And now if I turn my RF back on, it picks up my signal. We can see that it's actually a valid measurement. If I go change pulse with 3 microsecond, it's a valid measurement. So that's the first bug that's been fixed. The second bug was about the measurement, average measurements in regular mode, not showing the right value. So here you can see that the peak is -1 and average is about 3 dB lower, -4. It's a 50% duty cycle. If I do measure peak, it takes a minute, but it will show you about -1. And if I look average, it's -4. This was all good in the past too. The problem was when we went into power meter mode, what happened. And there's a recommendation, and I had this before, that we disconnect and reconnect the power sensor when we switch modes to be sure to have it reset. So that's a good practice if you're switching modes with the power sensor. Disconnect, reconnect. So I've now reconnected it, and it's waiting to read the power sensor. It takes a minute first time around. You can see it's now saying zeroing. So it's got the right value. And here I'll say measure peak. There's my -1, and I measure average, it's -4. And we did an experiment. Let's not worry about what this frequency says. But here, if I say, for example, 50 meg, this value is higher, and it's easier actually to see it in the peak, because at lower frequency, my cables and all that stuff have less loss. If I change my frequency to 5 gig, it drops. So really the point is that the average and peak are updating. It used to be in the past that if you were in regular power sensor mode, these average and peak values were not updating when you were changing frequency. So we can see that's fixed. And finally, the last problem is actually back into pulse measurement mode. And that was for some round values like 1 microsecond of pulse repetition interval that it was not capturing them. So we'll go into tracecraft mode, and it's going to take a minute for it to read the power sensor. I think I have to wait for a minute to make that measurement. And let's say the frequency is 5 gigahertz. We're fine with that. The pulse, so if I have, let's say make this 998 microsecond, the customer had a very narrow pulse. This was 200 nanoseconds, and I will turn my ALC off because my SIGGEN cannot put out that signal. So I have a pulse here that's 998 and 200 microsecond, and let's take a look at 998 is about 1 millisecond. Let's take a look at 2 milliseconds of data. And I also should set my resolution to high because it's such a narrow pulse. Small duty cycle. There's my pulse. You can see it. And the issue was that if they changed this in the past to 1,000 or 1 millisecond, this would disappear. And now it doesn't. I can have nice round numbers, 1 millisecond or half a millisecond. These were some of the values the customer was using. And you can still see all the pulses. This was some issue with a bug that we fixed, so that we have now resolution for all 3 of these. This is firmware revision. It's 9.61 RC13. That's an internal release candidate. It will be published as 9.61 when it goes out to customers, and I'll let you know.